The BOOcast synth of the month is the the Casio CZ-101. Imagine, it's 1982, and after years of research and collaboration with Isao Tomita and Yukihiro Takahashi, Casio patents a new form of sound synthesis, phase distortion. Then, a year later, in 1983, Yamaha releases the DX7 digital FM synth and basically takes over the world, with musicians everywhere ditching their analog synths in order to get their hands on that horrible, horrible piano sound. 1 year later, Casio unleashed their digital face distortion Cosmo synth range, starting with this, the CZ-101. Tiny, plastic, priced at just £350, and seemingly a mere toy bow and arrow against the mighty Yamaha DX range. But by 1989, Casio had sold 80,000 of the little darlings, and though the Cosmo synths were intuitive to program, sounded lovely, and were much more affordable than the other programmable MIDI-enabled polysynths of the time, Casio abandoned phase distortion less than 10 years after they introduced it. Is it time for a comeback? Casio-san, I have a suggestion. The Casio CZ-101. So yeah, Casio released this in 1984. Let's have a look at the front panel. So on the left we've got effect. There are no effects on the CZ-101. What they think are effects are the bend range, vibrato, and portamento. Yeah, there you go, effect. And then we got the programmer, which gives us our presets. And let's hear some of them. So first one's Brass Ensemble 1. Trumpet. Violin. String Ensemble 1. Now, these are editable, although not savable. I don't think. You can't overwrite the internal presets. That's a pretty acceptable sound. Whistle. And percussion. We've also got some internal sounds which I have already done. This is remember that? But anyway, there you go. There's the programmer, and then there's a data entry section, and then we've got the parameters. Now this, the whole synth is basically encapsulated in this section here with these buttons. That's kind of it. So it looks like a pretty simple synth. So let's dive in and have a little play with the CZ-101. So I'm going to find an empty setting. There we go. So it's phase distortion this synth is using, and the way phase distortion works is best demonstrated by, if I show you, I'm going to initialize this patch, and then you press and hold initialize and just run your fingers over everything that might need initializing. So we've got, even though there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 buttons here, this is actually just duplicated. We've got one synth line and another synth line here, and we can choose whether to have line select 1, line select 2, 1 and 2, or 1 and 1, which we'll come to in a second. That's to do with the ring modulation and the noise. But we This is it. These 6 buttons control your synthesizer. Simple? Yeah. Really, really simple. Compared with FM anyway. And it's quite ingenious what Casio have done here. So phase distortion works like this. The first thing you do when you're creating a sound is you choose your waveform here with this waveform switch. And we've got a choice. We can have first waveform and a second waveform. So we can put 2 in. Now the first waveform by default is a sawtooth, which sounds like this. FM synthesis and the DX7 uses sine waves, and it uses sine waves to modulate other sine waves to create more complex waveforms than sine waves. It's frequency modulation. High rates of wobble creating different waveforms. This is using sine waves too, but it's not doing it in the same way. Phase distortion is messing with the phase of the duty cycle of the sine wave. So our sawtooth here, that's actually a sine wave that has been shrunk up at one end and extended at the other. So instead of going woo, whoop, it's going whoop, woo, like that. This is a digital synth with no filter. How then can we do this? So that sounds like a filter opening, doesn't it? A bit. It's not a filter opening. What you're hearing there is the sine wave. That's the sine wave, and it will slowly become phase distorted very, very slowly. Let's speed it up a bit. Phase distorted into a saw. Let's make that a bit quicker. Oh God. So the rate for each of these steps, so this is a step of an envelope, goes from 1 minute to 1 millisecond. So we can have very, very slow evolving things happening. There we go. Now we can hear it. So that's a pretty good emulation for an early 80s digital synth of a filter opening. Not bad anyway. So that's how phase distortion works. Unlike the DX7 where you're messing around with algorithms and how to get sine waves to modulate other sine waves to get the timbre you're after, on the CZ-101 you get to choose a waveform just like you're using an analog synthesizer. So the first one's a saw, second one is a square, third one is a narrow pulse, third one is a sine and a pulse together, and then there's a sort of half sine, half square. So those are our basic waveforms, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. It's definitely not a synth for tweaking live, because that's what happens there. Those are our waveforms. I've just done a very simple thing here. Once we've chosen our waveform, we're invited to choose a second waveform if we wish. But this is interesting. This doesn't do audio mixing of the waveforms. This cascades between the first and the second waveform. So if you choose a triangle and then a square, it will give you a triangle, then a square, then a triangle, then a square, etc., etc. It drops the sound by an octave. I'll just show you that. So let's choose our saw. I've actually darkened the filter. And the second waveform we'll choose. Narrow pulse. Sounds like an octave lower because it's weirdly joining these waveforms together one after the other, creating a new waveform. I don't know what it is about the CZ-101. It's clearly digital. This filter is not even trying to be a filter. It's just solving a problem from the early 80s for us. But it has I like the quality of it. It feels a little unstable. There's some kind of warmth in its circuits in there. Also, I've read somewhere that different CZ-101s have different qualities because of certain things inside that need to be calibrated and tuned differently. And if they go off slightly, it can change the quality of the sound quite a lot. So So there we go. That's how we choose our waveforms. Let's go back here. I'm just going to turn off the second waveform because we haven't looked at waveforms 6, 7 and 8. So when Isao Tomita helped Casio design the waveforms for this, one of the things that he wanted was resonance. I need a synthesizer that can do resonance. Now, resonance comes from a filter. This is a synth without a filter. How can you get resonance? Casio sat and thought, and they did this. So here we have what sounds like sounds a bit like resonance. Got a kind of a synthesizer, you know, the Moog sound. Clearly I'm being ironic here. But we've got that kind of resonant sound, and the way that's happening is that these final 3 waveforms actually have an additional sine wave added to where the cutoff frequency is expected to be. The sawtooth without resonance sounds like this. With resonance, it sounds like this. So what Casio have done here is they've added a sine wave at roughly where the cutoff of the resonance should be. They've tracked it down, so that's just a high note going in to emphasize the cutoff frequency. And it seems to work. So that's the waveforms. The way we fake a filter is that we unbend them back into sine waves. All of these waveforms are made from sine waves with their phase timings distorted to create different waveforms. We've also got, in DCO1, we choose a waveform. The next thing we get is an envelope. Now, the envelope on the CZ-101 has up to 8 stages, which is quite daunting, especially with this tiny little window and these value buttons and cursor buttons. It can be a bit, it's not much fun. But, I'll just show you what they do. So the first one is DCO1. This affects the pitch of your oscillator. So it's step 1 has a rate of 50. So that means the speed at which it climbs is 50. Whatever they are, 50 standard international Casio units, and then it dives down again. So look at the next step, also 50, and it dives down to 0, which is the actual, root note of the tuning. So pretty good. Yeah, pretty good cat noise, isn't it? Yeah, that's quite enough of that. So so step 1 is 50. If I increase the number there, it will increase the speed. So we get, if I reduce the number here, it slows down the speed. So remember, this is rate, not time. So higher numbers are quicker. So yeah, okay, so there's step 2. As I said, we can go all the way up to step 8, which is a bit daunting. It can be, but the useful thing about this is you can change pitch all the way through here. So we've only got one vibrato, and it's only connected to pitch, and it's global. So if we want something different to happen to the pitch of each of these individual synth lines, we do it here. So we can... So there we've made a little... So that's not an LFO, that's the envelope steps changing the pitch as we go along. So I think we've dealt with the DC. This is basically where you choose your waveform. Z. If you want a second one, let's do a second one. The next parameter we come to is DCW, and that means digitally controlled wave. And this is basically sort of our filter. So step 1, again, we've got each of these envelope steps. We've got up to 8. So we'll try step 1. That's quite quick, so let's make it slower. So we're starting with the sine wave, which is slowly being bent into the 2 waveforms we chose earlier on. Step 2, this is again going down to 0, but we don't have to. We can bring it halfway. So as you see, we can have multiple attacks now. So if I go down to fake 2 filter hits. Yeah, there it is. If I want to slow that down a little bit more. Now, any of these steps we can call the sustain point or the end point. So sustain basically means that it goes through its motions, and then sustain is where it will hang while you're holding your finger on the keys. So if I turn this into a sustain point, it's holding at 0. If I turn that up a bit, there you go, now it's holding there. And the final step is by default end, always ends at level 0, rate whatever you want it to be. Let's make it slower. And finally, we have DCA1, which is the amplifier. So step 1 is obviously your attack time. Although I'm going through this in quite a linear way, it's always, you can always go back to the waveform and decide I don't want resonant there, I want it to be. Because they work polyphonically, it's possible to fake echoes and reverbs and delays and stuff. I'm actually going to turn up some effects. As I said, it's an 8-stage envelope, and we can choose which stage is going to be your sustain point and which stage is going to be your end point. Now, it's useful to use 8 stages because you get to mess with the stuff over time, but you can also call step 1 your sustain point and step 2 your end point. So yeah, there we have an attack release envelope, a 2-stage envelope. And that works perfectly well. If you feel like it's too much trouble for you, Casio have allowed you to go, I can't cope with it, I cannot brain this sound anymore, I am going to just make it really simple. So there we go, we have made a sound. We've got one of our synth lines done. Now we can do another one, so let's just do that. So that's really simple, isn't it? So I'm actually going to call that the end point. So yeah, I'll keep that really simple. I mean, this is why it's so, lovely, because, I mean, doing that kind of filter cutoff stuff on a DX isn't as simple as it should be. It's quite a complex sort of thing, and although the DX maybe is a little more, flexible, perhaps, this is definitely designed to sound and feel a bit more like an analog synth, whereas the DX7 is designed to be like, it could be anything you like. It's so simple to program. So there's a little sound there. Now we've got 2 sounds. We can combine them by hitting this button here, 1 and 2. And when we've got 2 synth lines running at once like this, we can go to detune and we get some options here. So we can just change the octave of the second one. also change the notes. So let's go to a fifth. And we've also got fine tune. Again, standard Casio units. It goes up to 60. I don't know what it is. I should get the manual out. So now we've made this sound together. You've sat with me doing it. Bless you. Thank you for still being there. So once we've got two of these synth lines running, we can now use ring or noise. So let's hit the ring modulator. It's the strangest ring modulator on earth. It's modulating 1 with 2, I think. And this is noise now. So what noise does is it turns the second line into just noise. And we can... yeah, you can mess around with it. I hardly ever use that though. It's much more interesting to me for this kind of thing. Yeah, we've also got vibrato, so I'm going to actually add some of that. So we'll go to the vibrato. I'm going to choose, there's the waveforms, so we've got a triangle, saw, ramp, and square. I'm going to go for square. There are some other sounds I've made here. The sound from the intro. Kind of slow evolving thing. Oh, nice. We can also, there's some buttons here which we can use. So solo turns it into a mono synth. Tone mix allows you to add another sound to it. So we've got this one from the internal. So we can blend two sounds. So now we've got the sound we just made plus the earlier one. So that's 4 synths happening at once. Multiple filters opening and closing all over the place. Which is an impressive feat when you consider that this synth has no filter whatsoever. So, to sum up, the CZ-101, I never had one as a child. I did play with one at school, and I didn't like it. I was a bit of an analog snob when I was 12. Well, 15, 16, to be fair. I just looked at this and thought, no, I don't really like it. It looks too complicated. And I didn't... yeah, it looked like a toy. It's exactly the same size as all the, Casio tones that I now also love very much indeed. I found this in a charity shop tipped off by my friend Stan, who told me there's a synth in a shop nearby that I think you might be interested in, and it was £100. Great value. And yeah, it's one of those synths. It's like the Casio tones in that it's inspiring. You kind of get inspired by playing with it. It does things. It has a vibe. It's got an atmosphere. It's got personality. I hope you can hear that it's got something very warm about this synth. And yeah, Casio abandoned phase distortion in 1989 after releasing I think it was the VZ advanced interactive phase distortion synths. But yeah, they abandoned phase distortion, and it's such a pity because it's a pretty unique system of synthesis, and it's simple, it's intuitive. I think one of the things that held it back though is that it's not scalable. With Yamaha's FM, you can have like 2 operator synths and 4 operator synths and 6 operator synths, and any more than that and you're into the realms of insanity, I guess. But I mean, even now there's some FM on some current synthesizers. Basically it's just 2 operators, but with the phase distortion you've got no such ability to scale it down or scale it up. Basically all of the CZ synthesizer range had the same engine inside them, just with varying amounts of polyphony and what have you, and some say with slightly different sound qualities as well. I'm not sure about that myself, but yeah, it's a beautiful synth. I love it. I'd love it to come back. And Casio, if you're listening, I'm sure you're not, but here's my suggestion to you. See this little baby? Now, picture this. Here's a little OLED screen. Here are 6 buttons. Here's a switch for which synth line you're using, and here's all the other buttons around. And on the OLED screen, you can see your 8-stage envelope. I'm sure that technology would fit inside there. Would any of you go for that? Something, I mean, maybe a little bit bigger, but imagine a CZ in the form factor of a VL tone. I mean, Casio seem to have abandoned it. And okay, you can get plugins and stuff, but imagine that. I'm genuinely, I want that to happen. How do I do that? Anyway, so we'll say goodbye to the Casio CZ-101 with one last little tune. Here we go.